Welcome back to the house, Brian Gill.
Woo! Happy to
Woo!
be here. Yay!
Yay. Brian, you know what? Let's call this Act Two.
Okay, great.
Instead of Part Two, this is Act Two because we've had costume changes.
Yeah. I was wondering what shirt I wore the last time.
I was thinking, what did I wear the last time? What hairstyle did I have? But hey, people, I've gone and brushed my hair and put my teeth back in, especially for Brian.
I love it, and I still have no hair.
Well, you clearly didn't brush yours, Sam, but I'm glad
Nothing
you put your teeth back in.
The teeth are back in.
Anyway, we are going to do a full geek out in this episode. I am so excited, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this because you and I have a great friendship and a great trust, and you're not going to be offended by what may come out of my mouth at different points of time through this part of the interview. And you are such a highly respected pedagogue, and you're such a highly acclaimed person when it comes to evidence-based, science-based pedagogy, the acoustics. You work with Johann Sundberg. So I feel like I'm in good hands, and I hope you realize that too. So let's take our audience on this geeky journey. And I'm going to start off by asking you, what does evidence-based and science-based mean to you?
Ooh, you had to start with that one.
Well, I mean, let's start with the hard questions and let's sort that out before we move on. Because to me, evidence-based is when you go to a court of law and you present your evidence, and in Australia, you're innocent until proven guilty. So
that's right.
How does that apply to singing?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, which again, I don't know if we discussed this before, but evidence-based to me, it really comes from the medical community. I mean, and there's an incredible background there, and there's robust longitudinal studies, and and really high end, right? So the number of participants is through the roof, and so then you can start to claim evidence-based. I think in voice, most of the studies are very few. There are lots of singular people in the studies. And I mean, it's a good place to start because I do think voice is highly individualized, but to tease out of that something that we could really, truly, confidently say is evidence-based, I think is too early. So that's my opinion there. Science-based, on the other hand, is what have we looked at in research, and are there any things that are standing out within research from different groups of researchers, right, across the globe? And so I think science-based would be taking a look at those themes and then trying to use tools that are aiming towards those end goals. So I think that's important. So I prefer science-based or science-informed, that kind of thing, over evidence-based. Personally.
Are either of those generalized? Because how does that apply to an individual? Because everyone is different. As singers, we're all unique because we're human beings. So how does that apply to a singular person? Because to me, as someone who has done some research, I did a PhD, you gather the information, you start pulling out themes, commonalities, but it's not, it's the majority of what came out. It's not exclusively what came out in that research. Is that the same in science-based and evidence-based?
It is. You have to look at the individual. I mean, we could start with, I mean, one thing that clearly jumps out within our field is there's, tissue, any tissue on the body, there's a cost to excess friction, we'll say, at the level of the vocal folds, right? Or anywhere. Rub yourself like that, right? There's a cost to that rubbing, and you can get irritation from that excess friction. So within singing, to say that anyone should engage in a really high contact time for a long period of time can't be. It just can't. Although
Right.
I'm waiting for some mutant human to come along who doesn't seem to be bothered by that at all, with great stability. So I think one of the things we need to be on the lookout for would be an exception or exceptions in any of the categories that we'll probably talk about tonight. But in general, you could generalize that tissue is going to be sensitive to friction. It will break down with excess friction. So there's a certain amount of time that you can have the tissue kind of grinding against each other from the two folds. Now, that amount of time would vary based on the thickness of the mucosa, based on the presence of hyaluronic acid in the vocal folds, which is a buffer. It's a buffer in all of our joints. It's a cushion. And again, that's been shown in a couple of studies where in the most superficial layer of the vocal folds, you don't have as much hyaluronic acid in born female singers. And you have more of it in born male singers. So there is a natural buffer in born male singers. Now, does that change with hormones, right? There's the big question, and we need more studies there. And that's going to be fascinating to find out, but we don't know. So again, I'd say because there's tissue cost, we should at least have that on our list of things. In general, we want to avoid excess friction.
Okay. So I studied vocal pedagogy in 2008. And last year, I decided that I would sit in the corner and sit back in on that class again. So 2022. So 14 years later. And there was such a change in the way that the course was delivered, but the course content had changed a lot, and there was a lot around acoustics. So I would like to ask you, why has this trend happened, and what is the fascination with acoustics?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, it's been studied for quite a long time, but I think some key players within voice pedagogy found it easy to understand and then started promoting it because it seemed like a robust enough topic or outcomes within acoustics to teach more specifically. And so I think that started catching on. Also, just from an interest standpoint, I mean, what we deal with is the signal. Like, we're affected by the way the acoustics are produced, which harmonic is spiked more than another, or which group of harmonics is spiked more than another. We are affected as listeners by that. So if you can take a look at it using acoustic software, then that's fascinating. And again, once you look at the research, are there any things that really jump out in a robust manner? And if the answer is yes, which it is, then you can start to understand more specifically how to address certain clients in any genre of music.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to dumb all that down in a moment. But before I do you feel it's gone too far? Because I feel like everywhere at the moment, during the summer there in the US, there were acoustic workshops, acoustic programs being plugged everywhere. So do you feel it's gone too far? Is it dehumanizing the singer?
Yes, it has the risk of doing so. I'm a big fan of variety, and very different timbres. I love the fact that the people I work with all sound very different. Most of the time, people couldn't say, that, oh, hey, that's a student of Brian's, unless they're just thinking, I think they have decent function, I would say. So, but again, you wouldn't be able to say that's got this signature sound or something, and you could do that with other teachers. You can be very clear about, oh yeah, I've heard this sound before, and then you can. So I think that when you're operating and really focusing on the individual, you can avoid that overlap and sort of similarity in sound. So you have to focus on sort of the big ballpark elements that jump out of the science, what we've teased out in certain studies. So I think, yes, it's gone too far in that people will, I've seen many, many master classes where people will depend on the acoustic adjustment more than meeting the individual where they are. So that means they have to produce a certain acoustic output, and that's the goal of the workshop, more so than getting that person to the right place for them at that moment.
That's so interesting. So it's not student-centered.
No. Yes.
That is not good. Okay,
No.
sorry, I just made my first comment. That's just judgy comment. Hate me now, people. No, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's not about us. It's about the student. And I love that you said all your students sound different. And can I tell you, all of my students all sound different. And I meet where the student is at in that moment in time on that day when they walk in.
Exactly. That's it. The idea is we will start to work against the student if we assume they're going to do what they did the last time, right? Positive or negative, right? Or B, assume they can't do something else based on that information. It's just, so we really have to meet them at any time, because they could have, for emotional, psychological reasons, regressed a bit and be, that could be having a rough day. And so we shouldn't expect that. Or they could have processed so well all of a sudden since the last lesson that they're beyond where we were, because they did really good practice on their own. So we got to be ready. I'm ready to be surprised either direction, and then meet them where they are, and then help them out from there. And so I think that the workshops that are designed, I understand why we do it, but the workshops that are designed to just show acoustics, I think it's like, I'm not quite sure what that does for us, because we really got to look at the whole and where the student is. So I prefer workshops where you're dealing with the whole, and if acoustics is something you could tease out of it. So I've done some of those where I'll have, Voce Vista or something else running in the background, and if something of interest just happens to pop up, I can say, oh, and look, like for my audition here for Indiana University, that's what I did. I had it running, and I was like, this is not interesting acoustically, but let me get this person unstuck. So we would do that, and then we'd find, 10 minutes later that all of a sudden there's a tuning strategy that's very common within tenors or within sopranos or mezzo, whatever, and it would show up, and I'd say, okay, now everybody take a look at this. Could you do that passage again? And I find that's more compelling and more real and more in the moment, and it allows the individual to be where they are without the pressure. I mean, when you see those workshops where they're like, we need to get the third harmonic spiked, and the person's going and they're repeating over and over again, pushing, and the third harmonic's not up yet, and you're like, oh, this is like the antithesis of artistry, and I think that that's not what we should be striving for.
I have like 5 trillion questions based on all of what you just said. My mind is blowing up. It is exploding. First up though, for those people who don't understand acoustics, and I'm going to put my hand up, all right? I don't understand, and it hasn't held me back as a teacher. My students are doing incredible work. Okay, so that's my disclaimer. Can you dumb down acoustics and give me the reasons why I should study and apply acoustics in my voice studio? So I'm asking you to do the hard sell.
Yeah, okay, good. So, well, first of all, I would say that, because you're having success with your students, you do know acoustics. Okay. Because you're listening to them.
100%. My ears are my best friend.
That's acoustics. That's it. So there's acoustics, and then there's the description of acoustics, right? And
Right.
so that's really what we're getting into. So I think really successful teachers, they're using their ears, and so they are very aware of acoustics. They might not be able to say, harmonics and harmonic 1 through whatever, right? Or then say, how are those harmonics coming from the vocal folds interacting with the shapes of the vocal tract, right? Yeah, that becomes a head scratcher. And that is what's happening. We have information coming from clapping together vocal folds that produce harmonics, and actually in harmonics too, they produce what are called partials, right? So they're clapping together. All this sound starts heading up through the space of the vocal tract.
Yes.
Depending on how that vocal tract is shaped, certain information will make it out into open air, into people's ears, and certain information will get knocked out. Right. And so that's what you're listening for, is if you hear someone where there's missing information, right? Lack of clarity or unevenness of timbre, you're paying attention to acoustics.
Right.
So that's a key component. So I'd say, first of all, you're really close because that's what you're doing. The next step is to be able to say it, or not, if someone's interested in that, to be able to say it out loud. And that is a huge leap. It really is. I know that because I remember doing it myself. I think that it's like learning a foreign language. And even though, I mean, the benefit is you already know the sounds. So I had already learned the sounds, which was great. I had learned them from my mentor, Barbara Dosher. And because I had that in my ear, when I met people who were teaching me acoustics, whether it be, Johann Sundberg or Don Miller was one of my first people, or Ingo Tietze. Really, Ingo was probably the first one to describe it more in the science side. I went, ooh, that aligns with what Barbara would have me do. So it was exciting. So I think that's what I'd be looking for if I were you or anyone else who uses their ears really well. Start to look at how does one thing within the nerdy science explanation of acoustics, how does that overlap with what you know to be true? So
Yes.
yeah. So then you want me to dumb it down.
Dumb it down. Make it as dumb as possible.
Okay, I will try. It's not easy to do. So basically, from the vocal folds, do you know, well, sine waves, right? That's what gets complicated, right? Sine wave, a harmonic is a sine wave. It's a simple sine wave where you've got an increase in pressure and a decrease in pressure. That's it. And they travel through air or water, right? Or anything, concrete. I mean, they'll travel through something like a wall, and they are produced by the vocal folds in voice, right? They can be produced by anything. You can get them from clapping together, right? But that's what's happening. The vocal folds are going like that. It produces them. When it produces them, you get what's called a source spectrum, which is just a lineup of all the partials that are coming from the vocal folds. The cool thing about it is they will appear with the fundamental sound that we'll all hear as the note the person is singing.
Yes.
They'll appear as that's the highest, or the highest energy, and then there'll be a subtle drop off of energy as all the other harmonics increase in frequency. That's all happening at one time. So you'll have the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, second, all the way through whatever, hundreds, of harmonics. They'll all appear at once with a sound. And there'll be a steady decline in energy. And that decline in energy is called a spectral slope. So that's what's coming from here. Now, how steep the slope is, like how much the sound drops off as we increase in that one moment, as we increase in frequency, is called spectral slope. So if it's a steep slope, it means that the vocal folds are actually not coming together very much at all.
So that's a breathy sound.
That's a breathy sound. It has a very steep spectral slope.
Okay. So that means there's air leaking.
That's right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
See, I do know stuff.
That's it. And so as we increase contact, we start to increase the intensity of higher frequency harmonics and partials just in general. So the harmonics are usually what make it out more than anything else. But when you're dealing with noise components, you will also have inharmonic partials make it out into open air. So as we start to increase contact, we start to have a much less steep slope. So we get more and more energy in high harmonics, and that's going to change timbre, very much so. So from going from breathy, we can start to have a really robust kind of brilliant sound, because now there's more strength. So we know that at the level of the vocal folds, that must mean that they are in contact longer. And that's it. And that's the change that's made. And when they're in contact longer, we have to be mindful that there's also a friction component to that. They are the tissues together, and it increases friction. So we do have to be careful about how long they're together.
Right.
So that's an important thing. So if we can get the timbre and the brightness or power that we want with the minimum amount of contact for that goal to be met, that's our gold standard. So keeping those things in mind. So that's the source spectrum. Then that energy, with the fundamental being the highest and then the nice decline, that all of those sine waves that make up that complex wave at one moment, they start to head through the vocal tract. Depending how the vocal tract is shaped, certain information gets boosted and certain information gets critically dampened. Doesn't make it out. And actually, it's estimates of about 1% or less makes it out.
Really?
Which is shocking, which just means that there's a tremendous amount of noise at the level of the vocal folds.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a buzz saw.
Yes.
If you hear that. So really it gets beautifully filtered into this wonderful tone that we all know and love. But I think that's a fun statistic. So what it tells me, though, is we need to be pretty picky about the information. Since it's 1% or less, we need to make sure that it's the information we want to get out. So I think that's a takeaway from the study of acoustics. So once it's shaped, this highest first harmonic, or you can also call it the fundamental frequency. The first harmonic is synonymous with the fundamental frequency. So that will no longer necessarily be the highest in the acoustic, what's called an output spectrum. The output spectrum is what you would see on Voce Vista or Rutan-Sect or any acoustic software program.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden, you're going to get different things that are higher, which again is an indicator that the source spectrum has been filtered through the vocal tract or filtered by the vocal tract. So it's neat. So you can easily identify a source spectrum, and you can easily identify an output spectrum based on that fact. Okay. So once you get there, there are certain harmonics that have been shown in a very robust manner to be dominant in the spectrum for classical singing, for contemporary music theater or pop singing. And so there's a bit of a, while I don't think it's any of those are 100%, you would lose some individuals if you thought that. They're robust enough that you'd at least want to entertain them and assume that the majority of your students will do this, which is kind of neat. Be ready for the one that destabilizes when they try, but at least be open to the idea. So for contemporary music theater, what a lot of people will associate with a belt sound is a dominant second harmonic, and sometimes a dominant third harmonic. So a lot of people simplify, like in a recent article, they said, well, for a belt sound, it's the second harmonic, and it's really not true. You can get a belt sound with the third harmonic just as well. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Is that because they use a lot of twang?
No, it's the way you shape the vocal tract.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So some people might assess it and say that's twangier than this, and again, it starts to get. That also is tricky because it starts to get into hearing biases. Some people might say this is twang, and then another person might say no, it's not. That's just And so I think each individual should find out how they talk about it. I don't think it's really healthy necessarily to systematize that, because it's essentially just personal. We all hear differently, so it would be just personal description of something.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's fine to do those, but each teacher would need to be able to explain what they mean. What do you mean by this? and and produce it. I sang professionally in a country music band, and twang had a very different sound to it. It wasn't necessarily what people are talking about high harmonics. Twang had to do with an accent you have in country music.
I was going to say that's all accent produced.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
I see. My ears told me that straight away.
That's
See, my
right.
ears don't fail me.
They don't. That's what I'm saying. You are invested in acoustics.
Okay, because sometimes I know, and I know this is something that you've talked about with me quietly, when not on this platform. But, like, for example, there are times I know just by changing a mouth shape, it's going to produce the sound that we need, or more efficient breath, or whatever it is. Sometimes just by making those adjustments to the vocal tract is going to fix the problem. Now, I don't know anything about acoustics, but I do know that that works.
Yes, but well, and again, you're dealing with acoustics, so you wouldn't know how to maybe to explain it with which harmonic
No,
is by that. Yeah. So
I
I'll
have
give you an
no
example.
clue.
If for instance, the beautiful thing about harmonics is they're always the same pattern. So if we have, this is the note that you're singing.
Oh, hello, there's a keyboard there.
Yes, I have my keyboard, and this is where I teach from. If this is the note you're singing, so we've got an F3, yeah? The acoustics of that are going to be F3 and then an octave above that, and then a fifth, right? And then an octave, then a third, then a fifth, and flat 7, octave, second, third, sharp 4, 5. Those are the first 12 harmonics of any note. It goes fundamental, then it goes octave, and this is speaking in terms of keys. So the fundamental frequency, and then an octave above that, and then the fifth of the key, and then the next octave of the key, then the third, then the fifth, then the flat 7, and then the octave again, and then second, third, sharp 4, 5. It will always be that. So if someone says, hey, this is a belt note and it's on A4, right? And you think, well, I want this belt note to be not third harmonic dominant, I want it to be second harmonic dominant, right? What is the second harmonic of that A4? Well, it's root and then octave. So it's an octave above. So what happens when you do the belt, you make a shape with the mouth that will cause a boost of that second harmonic. So how do you do that? You do what you just said. It's a shape. So if you're on this note and you're singing, if you're going, and I'm going to click on my vocal fold, on my larynx with my vocal folds closed, and I'm going to get the frequency of the first resonance of the vocal tract. And that's what would be given the boost to that second harmonic. So if I'm on this note, I want it to be up there.
We can't hear that.
Oh, you can't. Wait, let me change.
No.
I see it. Let me put on original sound. Now you'll be able to hear it. Sorry about that. It's switched off. So if I go here, if I'm going to sing, you want to get the frequency of the first formant to match that octave. And then you will get a boost of the second harmonic. That's it. So if someone were shaping in a way that wasn't that, like, whoops, that's not right. That's right.
Okay.
So that's acoustics.
But what is the advantage of doing that?
You know what shape to go to get the sound you want. If you're like, this is a belt climax, then if the person's singing E, that's far from. That's it.
Yeah, mouth shape, which is what I say to my students when they're belting, is usually you want that square, that drop the jaw little and square shape.
Yeah, in general, you're gonna raise the first formant. So again, you start to weed out maybe personalized things that perhaps one circumvented skillfully, that aren't necessarily true.
Hmm.
So we can say that when this shape is close to the second harmonic, you're going to get a boost of it. We can say that. That's robustly studied. So if someone's saying shape like this, that's not it. That's not going to do it. And so we can argue that then. You can say, well, you may like that shape, but that's not going to produce that output. Now, you could also argue, well, I don't want that output. I don't want the second harmonic to be spiked. Then do what you want. Do you see what I'm saying? But
Yes.
there's a way that we can sift through the noise and get down to the heart of it. Now, I am not a huge fan of systematizing that everybody's got to do A, B, or C. I want
100%.
yeah, I want unique sounds. And so I
Hmm.
do think some people, a lot of people actually, stumble upon that first formant or first resonance of the vocal tract, boosting the second harmonic in belt. They stumble upon it very naturally and it's easy for them. I say go for it, right? I have other people that are more comfortable with their mouth more closed, so that starts to go down. So it actually ends up becoming not possible to do as easily to do
Yes.
the first formant or first resonance, synonymous, those are the same thing,
Yes.
um, second harmonic boost. And so they end up gravitating more towards the second resonance of the vocal tract, boosting the third harmonic. And it's a great strategy. Sounds awesome. Ethel Merman did it. Cynthia Erivo does it a lot. Dina Menzel, I've got a lot of studies, a lot of excerpts with her doing it. So it's a very common belt strategy.
So can you hear these things in a singer without them going putting their voice through the viva voce
Yes, yeah, yes, yeah,
or
the
whatever it is that
voce
you
vista, yeah, or any of
voce
those
vista?
acoustic things. Yep, yep. You can hear it. You learn to hear it, and again, for most of them, I learned how to hear it before I could describe it, which I think is a pretty strong model.
Mm.
I think learning how to hear it and then saying, well, this is what's happening, this is what we're hearing. I think for some people, it was for me a really strong model. I mean, other people are they gravitate towards visual learning. Um, that's a whole nother topic. That doesn't mean that we should
Yes.
only teach them visually, right? Because then you're not going to get new synapses. We really need to insist that everybody learn in multiple modes of learning. But because they gravitate towards it, they may excel with this visual. I've had some
Mhm.
students when they saw it, they went, "Oh," and then they shaped that way, and they were great. They always shaped that way, and I thought, "Wow, that would have drove me crazy." Looking at this.
Yes. Yes. So do you feel that for someone like me, it would be beneficial for me to learn acoustics formally, not just this kind of instinctual listening kind of teaching that I do now? If I went and studied this, it would help me in my practice.
I think the more full our toolbox is, the better off anyone is.
Good
Um,
answer.
yeah, I mean that's what it's about. But I think that you know, certain folks, the key is to not get intimidated by it, and also find a really good mentor, because all of these things should be learned slowly, gently over time, and not with a lot of pressure-filled explanations. It takes for me to learn it, I had to sit through it many times and hear the same thing. And the first time, I'm like, I didn't get any of that. Felt
Mm.
like felt like I didn't get any of it. And then the second time, I'm like, wait, no, I think I know one of those things, or maybe two. And then you go on from there, and it starts to come together. I notice people like, I mean, even Ingo Tietze and Johann Sundberg, I'll be sitting there and talking, and then all of a sudden you see well, maybe, and they investigate a new thing. So their minds are always open to a new way of understanding and a new way of looking at it. And I really, with the projects I've done with Johann, holy cow! I mean, that's one of the most open-minded, and flexible people. He knows so much, and
Yes.
he's open to that. So I think if you find a mentor like I have, that's going to be gentle, with the difficult stuff, and you just keep
Mm.
talking to him, and I do think it would be beneficial. So,
He is a really generous human. He's
yep.
such a beautiful person. I had the privilege of hanging with you and Johan
Yeah.
in Philadelphia, and I just saw a different side of him because he's a tall man and he wears his bow tie, so he kind of looks like that kooky professor. And you think, oh my gosh, this guy is really intimidating, but he is the exact opposite.
He is one of the most soulful people I've ever met.
I would
Beautiful.
have to agree.
Such a
I
great friend. Yeah.
Yeah, because the thing is, okay, from my perspective, as someone who doesn't understand this stuff,
Mhm.
that when I go on some of the forums on social media and there are people planting flags about it all
Mhm.
over social media, it is intimidating. And you kind of don't want to admit that you don't understand it because you feel that you're going to be shamed or
Yeah.
that you're not a good teacher
Yeah.
or your knowledge base is not sufficient.
Yeah.
So it's almost as though you feel that you have imposter syndrome in those moments. And I wouldn't be the only one,
Right. No,
right? I
lots.
wouldn't be the only teacher that feels like that. So do you feel that this kind of weaponizing, using this knowledge, is perhaps going to cause a divide in our teaching community? Because not everybody is going to be able to access this information
That's
for
right.
whatever reason.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I do think that we have to be careful there. I do see a good number of posts where people are sort of flexing their intellectual muscles, and it really isn't serving any purpose. It's
Mm,
it's getting into perhaps something that might be niche, kind of interesting, for a couple of people, and then saying, well, this is what we're looking at. I think that we should be looking first for the simplest explanation possible. And if
mm,
that doesn't hold up, then you've got to dig it a little deeper. But there are some very simple, straightforward things that we know in science of voice that have held up. And I don't think we need to make it more complicated than that. Again, this will be interesting. So yeah, I do think that that feeling that it's weaponized is really true. And what's fascinating to me is I will notice some folks who lead with that. I'll see a master class and they cannot affect positive change in the students they're working with. And so they may know this information, but the application is missing. And I think that as teachers, we have to not only be craving knowledge, but we have to be looking at how is this practically applied. And so if you take someone who is having great success with their students, but they don't know science at all, they don't know the scientific explanations, we need to be pausing and saying, what are they doing? Like, what is that? What's making this positive effect? And then join forces. Join forces and say, this is why that works. And I've done that with quite a number of people over the years, and that's some of the strongest knowledge I've gained. Is fusing.
I would love to partner with you because I do some kooky stuff in my teaching studio that's so left of center, and I have a particular teaching style.
Yeah,
And I'm not blowing my own trumpet. That's what we say here in Australia. So I'm not being egotistical here,
yeah,
but my teaching works. My students are doing really well. I've been teaching CCM since 1988,
yeah.
but my teaching continues to evolve. And I know now this is who I am as a teacher, but I am a lifelong learner. And I do things, and sometimes, like, I just go, I don't know why that thing worked. My instincts were saying, my ears were telling me to do this thing. So it'd be interesting to have someone say, that worked because of this.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's fascinating, and I had a very memorable session with one of my colleagues here, who has produced some of the top singers of today, from her studio, and she said, "Would you mind coming by and watching some lessons?" And I was like, sure, sure, let me come by there. And I mean, I'm just sitting there taking notes, like what you doing, and listening to these great exercises. And then she would say, "This is what I do," and it would make exactly the right change. And then she'd be like, "Why does that work?" so,
Mm,
so we just sat there and had this session back and forth, and it was all of them had pretty easy explanations. You
yeah,
know, yeah.
yes. And it's interesting because when I teach, I teach on my feet, as we
Yeah.
were talking about before. It's the student comes in and what do they come in with on that day,
Mhm.
in that moment in time. And sometimes I can't even begin the lesson before I get them to calm down
Yeah.
because they're stressed. So get them on the floor, just get them breathing, just calm them down with their eyes shut, then start working with them. I very rarely sit at a piano.
Mm.
I get them to do things that they can go and do that are very simple in that moment, that make that adjustment, and they
Mhm.
can take that home and do it. That
Mhm.
they don't need me sitting at a piano, because I figure if they can't do it at home on their own, then what's the point of it? So I've got all these little hacks that I use that implement change, and
Mhm.
done consistently will help that student without me having to tell them what to do.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, also, I think level of student matters though. Right? Don't you
True.
wouldn't you say would you say that like the early students who walk in and they clearly have some talent but they're not coordinated at all, that doesn't apply as much
True.
as okay, yeah. That's what I've noticed. Like I with my more advanced students, yeah, definitely can do that. They're so aware, their proprioception's developed. But when I get a young like a freshman coming into school, they really don't have the best proprioception, which is the big thing that divides a trained musician from an untrained, is
Mm.
that the developed ability to sense stimuli arising in the body. And so we've got to start somewhere with these changes, and it's super fallible. They'll also have some inclinations, based on their choir experiences in high school or junior high, or from a teacher who maybe didn't have the ears that we have, right?
Mm.
And so then you're also working through going, oh, I know you like that person, and I know they cared about you, but this is getting you in trouble, and then you also have to go through that. So it
Oh,
gets a little
yes.
more complicated when we're undoing and re-coordinating. But I know what you mean. I think ultimately it comes down to you want you want the individuals with whom you work to be self-sufficient. Yeah, and that's
Yes.
a very strong model.
Autonomous.
Yeah, that's it. And the thing that gets in the way of that, sort of as an absolute, is that they will never hear themselves sing. They'll hear recordings of themselves, but they will never hear themselves the way someone outside their head's going to hear them.
Of course. Of course.
Right?
And yeah. And
Yeah.
we
So
deal with that because how often do they say, that sounded rubbish? And
yeah.
you go, you weren't listening to what I was hearing. It
That's
sounded
exactly how
amazing.
Yes, yes, totally, totally.
Yeah. And so with this acoustics, we were talking about the divide in the teaching voice community. But what about when it comes to the student? Is this exacerbating a master apprentice model? By
So,
this is the knowledge that I have, this is what I know.
mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the things that we're riffing on in society now are super important because we have to push these limits and try and get to a better and better model. So a lot of people talk about the master apprentice, and to me, master apprentice means you come in, you listen to what I tell you, you do exactly what I tell you, and you don't talk back or question me. Right? That's to me what the master apprentice model is, the
Mm-hmm.
negative side of it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't like that model. It has to be interactive. But if you mean by master, you mean someone who has really, really high skill set and understands vocal coordination, right? The nuts and bolts involved, the acoustics. You can help affect positive change for the person in a way they have no idea what's happening because they can't. They are the apprentice. And if you mean that way,
Yes.
That's just a normal
Yes.
learning model. Someone who's an expert in
Mm.
the field working with someone who wants that, which includes that person who does have the expertise has to be compassionate, has to welcome that person into the room and make them feel like they're part of the process. But
Yeah.
to depend on any of their knowledge base, including proprioception in the beginning, is an act of futility because they don't have any of that developed yet. So I don't know. Is that what you mean by?
Yes, no, no, no. That's great. I was referring to the imposition of information or an imposition of a particular bias in terms of you were talking about earlier that you hear that there's a frequency or a sound and
Yes.
you're trying to create a particular sound based on acoustics that
Yes.
student doesn't want in their sound because it's not the sound that they're wanting to achieve.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So yeah, I would say, yeah, first we have to tease out whether the sound that they want is sustainable for them. So that's a
100%.
and I mean, how many students have you come in that have very unrealistic expectations? And so there has to be, and I say this now ad nauseum, there has to be a quote unquote adult in the room, meaning someone who's thinking about tissue cost, that singers who are successful have a higher flow than unsuccessful singers, right? And know about all these things. So, but if you disclude what they're wanting just based on your aesthetic preferences, I am completely against that. I think
Yes.
that's beyond sad and self-centered. Now, but say the person comes in generically wanting to be an opera singer. There are a few robustly studied resonance strategies that everyone uses. You won't find an exception in the thousands and thousands of people studied. Those I think we should be looking at. And
Right.
knowing those. And if the person says, well, I prefer this, you could say, well, you prefer it, but you probably won't be singing on an opera stage if you do that, if you want to make that sound. It's fine if you want to make that sound, I'll help you. But this is a key component, like first formant tuning, the first resonance of the vocal tract. Once you get to the upper middle voice in treble voices, it tracks the fundamental frequency up into the stratosphere. And that's just across the board. So if someone's telling you to shape in a way that won't allow that to happen, that's doing a disservice to that person who wants to be an opera singer. Uh,
Okay.
but yeah, but I'd say other folks who come in, like I have all kinds of like pop singers in particular and indie rock and all, they want a particular sound. And it might not be like the cleanest sound or whatever, and they want some noise in it and they want all these things. And it's like I am catering to them within reason up to a certain point, and I try to help them get the noise they want by supraglottal constrictions, not at the level of the vocal folds, so they can growl if they want, and then also some want a particular like what comes across initially to me as a strange timbre, but that's what they want. It's their signature timbre. I just go with
Yes.
it. I'm like, that's odd, but if that's what you want, we're not going to mess with that. But here's what we're gonna, here's what we're gonna change. You could make that same sound with a higher flow. Show them that, and then they go, "Oh, that feels easier." And you say, and it still sounds the same. Listen, and you just play it back for them, and then they get, very relaxed after that, and then they sign on. I have folks I've been working with for 15, 20 years now.
That's
Um,
interesting that you mentioned that because I was going to ask you, how does this apply to microphone singing, which is what we use in CCM? Basically, amplification is the extension of our voice.
yes, yeah. Which I mean, it's an incredible advantage. There are so many sounds you could make with much less contact here, actually, and blow them out with the microphone distance. So I think that people need to take advantage of that. Um, Most of the folks I train without a mic first and then get them on
Same.
a mic. Just because I
Yep.
think we're looking for stability first, and I'm not looking for a certain output. They don't need to sound like, they do with a microphone, any of that. I just want stability, and then let's say, how do you want to manipulate that, once you're plugged in there.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, stability first, and then look at how you could use the mic to enhance it.
I work in exactly the same way.
Nice, nice.
Exactly. So we're going to switch this up a little bit. And I just want to touch a little bit on pedagogy because I'm kind of feeling that the word pedagogy gets thrown around a lot,
Hmm.
right? But I feel in some ways we're starting to forget what the true meaning of pedagogy is. I know it's the art and science of teaching, but what does it mean to you? Because are we focusing too much on the tools that we use in teaching and calling that pedagogy? And are we forgetting about the philosophy of teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is it's this big ballpark topic of how you affect positive change for the individual with whom you're working.
Mhm.
That's it. And that could include a lot of things. You know, the psychology behind it, what's locking them up, right? Body awareness, right? It could include you know, proprioception, which is lumped in with body awareness. It could include acoustics. It could include flow dynamics, right? Resistance at the level of vocal folds. It can include, you know, shaping within the acoustics. It could include a whole lot of things. And again, like we were saying, it means that you need to be able to pivot depending on where that individual is when you meet them that day. Um, and so, yeah, I think that we need to be aware of the philosophical underpinnings, but we're really going for results for the individual, the aha moments.
100%. Yes.
And so it's essentially, if we keep saying use these tools, like I go around the world and I've been, you know, blessed to be in so many different places teaching, and I find in pretty much every place I've gone, people use semi-occluded vocal tract postures poorly. I mean poorly. Like they are not using them in a way that's going to affect very much positive change at all. And that's from, again, as you mentioned earlier, I think that this is coming from my perspective. I haven't done research on this. The research I've done is 30 plus years of teaching. And also people going, how did you do that change? Right? You know, when I go places, like I'm using that as my research. When people say,
Yes.
wow, I want you here because you affect positive change and we're not really sure. Even Johan, he's like, I can't explain what you do. He said the problem is it just works so well. Was his quote last time. You
What
know,
a terrible problem to have.
isn't it? Yeah. And so, you know, we every time we look at an element of what changed a person's, you know, life and attitude, and we say, well, how could we look at that? How could we look at this and really research it? So I just want to, you know, make sure that we qualify that. Um,
Yes.
you know, but we are looking for positive change for individuals, and it can come in so many different ways. And I think that that's the part that's left out. I think
Hmm.
that people are very friendly, loving, compassionate, all of those things, and they engage with individuals in a beautiful way that makes them feel good and all, but they don't necessarily affect positive change with regard to heading towards sustainability, flexibility, power, all and nuanced communication. And so then we're
Yes.
trapped by that. And it's, yeah, so I think we need to be really invested in checking our egos at the door and trying to affect positive change. But part of that is checking in with the individual and saying, what's the difference? Without any bias, you're like throwing at them. Where they say, well, the difference was, you know, but they spontaneously say, that's like so much easier. It's 90% of the effort I was using. That's what we're looking for. And I don't think people do that. I see master
Mm.
classes where the person is clearly working harder, but they really like the teacher. So they say, no, it's good. It's good. But you're like, no, that's not. And I know that they know it's not. You can see in their body language. And so we need to work for creating an environment where people will actually say what they're experiencing, not just stroke our egos when we're helping them make change. So,
I love all that because what I do actually 100% aligns with everything that you just said. And can I just say that for listening to you, basically, that was a philosophy.
It is.
It's a
Yeah.
philosophy. So we forget about the philosophical side of teaching.
Hmm.
And when people are endorsing a one approach, whether it be acoustics or not, then they're not addressing pedagogy from a philosophical standpoint. They're addressing a methodology or a teaching approach or a particular tool.
Yes.
And because we have a person in front of us with a psyche, with emotions, we've never walked a day in their lives,
Hmm.
and that's part of what makes up the voice, the instrument, the voice, the sound.
Hmm.
Should we then be open to different types of modalities, such as, for example, and I'm not suggesting anyone go and study all of these, but just be open and receptive to, for example, I had Yoga Voice, the people from Yoga Voice on my podcast a couple of weeks ago. Loved
Yeah.
how they thought about the voice, even if you don't take on their approaches, but some of that philosophical stuff, there's a lot to be said for it. And I know that your website includes the word mindfulness.
Yes.
So can you explain to me how that then how you combine what I'm thinking mindfulness is with the science?
Yeah, so mindfulness is being aware of what you're doing while you're doing it and the reasons why you're doing it. And assessing outcome without judgment, just discernment. Big difference between that. Like, oh, I didn't get what I wanted. No, no, no. Just say, oh, that felt interesting, or just a neutral assessment of what happened. So that's mindfulness.
Love,
Yeah.
sorry, love, because that is how you create a safe space for your students, is
That's right.
always coming from a place of not them, teaching them not to be judgmental of themselves
That's right.
and
That's
allow for playfulness and exploration, and don't put limitations on a voice because you don't know what it's capable of.
That's right. You have to create a sound playground. And they just need to get in there and explore things. And you start to, based on their impressions of difficulty level and your impressions of, well, if you want this to be timbrely even or not, or whatever it is, let's put all those things together and then agree as a team that this is the way forward. This is much easier and it's producing the result we want.
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
Sorry, I interrupted you. We were talking about, I just got highly excited then
I
because
love
I like it when someone speaks my language. I
Yeah,
have
me
to
too.
I have to chime in. But okay, in terms of mindfulness, you were saying about being present in the moment.
Yeah, and as you're looking and you start to practice discernment, which again, discernment comes from deep awareness, right? It's not a judgment. It's just being able to say, that is a bit more difficult than this. Okay, let me look for this because we're trying to look for something that's sustainable. And also, when we reduce the difficulty level, we can put more and more energy into just the communication that we're hoping to establish between one person or a huge group of people or our co-players on stage, whatever it is. And I think that that's what we need to be aiming for. If something's super effortful, we can't. Most of our energy is in, gosh, I hope I make it, and that's not enough.
Yes.
That's not a good place to be. And so I think mindfulness is, yeah, it's awareness. And so we're trying to excite awareness in the folks that we're working with.
So we're not talking about a woo-woo thing. And I feel like I use that word in every episode at the moment. But
Woo-woo.
but because a lot of people think stuff is woo-woo. And I had this discussion with someone outside of the voice community some
Mhm.
weeks ago. We were talking about someone who did Reiki,
Yeah.
and they said, "Oh, that's woo-woo." And I said, my interpretation of woo-woo is when someone doesn't understand something or it's beyond their scope of understanding,
Mm-hmm.
they deem it to be woo-woo.
Yep.
And his response was, no, there's no evidence, there's no science-based evidence behind it, was
Hmm.
their response. I went, I said, I'm actually impressed by that answer, but you know, we're all different, and
Well,
what does all that mean anyway?
yeah, and I think, I mean, there's certain things that are still so difficult to research. I think that was evidence, evidenced by Johan's comment. There are things I do just in the moment with individuals that you might say, God, that's clearly better for them. They're smiling, they're making people in the audience cry all of a sudden. Without anything being talked about the text or whatever, all of a sudden there's more emotional content, and you'd say, I have no idea what that is.
Mm,
And so I would say another research is, and the numbers very high with those of us who teach a lot, right? We're in the thousands of people that we've worked with, right? That's evidence, and that is research. That is research. That should be included in that. Now, it's a different kind of research, but I don't think it should be delegitimized. And so, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to go through a study, but I do think that if you can create studies off of those experiences, just little by little, we're going to start to head towards what would be more evidence-based
mm.
pedagogy. But that we're a long way away from that, in my opinion.
Yes. And that's one of the things that I feel when I read some of the forums, is that some of these teachers claim to have all this information and knowledge and are so-called experts.
Hmm.
But what are their students doing?
Yeah,
What are
yeah,
the student results?
right.
I want to hear their students sing. I
Yeah.
want the proof in the pudding. Don't show me the recipe.
Mm-hmm.
Show me the finished product, the
Yeah.
before and afters, and then I'll be impressed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what we're about. We're about affecting positive change.
Yes,
Not just,
philosophy.
yeah, and not just talking about it,
Mm.
but actually seeing it, and then having that reported back by people. I'll have a lot of folks come to me, and they will have worked with folks that are very knowledgeable, but their voices are they're dysfunctional. And so you go on a long journey to get them into the right realm, and it's very difficult for them psychologically because they really care about these people, and I know they were cared about by these people.
Mm.
So it's difficult. I mean, there was no malice intended, but I do think I think a strong teacher will question every day whether they're doing the best for their students
Mm.
every single day. You will not sit
Yeah.
there and go, "Hey, I got this. Next." Never, never. And that's, I think some of us stumble upon that more easily than others. I certainly did. I didn't plan to do that. I think I always question what I do. Anyway,
Yeah,
but
I do too.
yeah, and I think that's
Yeah.
a strong model. I
Yeah.
think that's
I mean, on my teaching days, I always set the intention to be
Mhm.
present with my students, to keep an open mind, open heart, don't be judgmental, and be the best I can be on that day.
Beautiful, beautiful.
I purposely I write that down, which may sound woo-woo to some people, and
I
that's okay.
love that. No, I love that. Not woo woo at all. It's beautiful.
Mm.
That's it. That's a great pathway towards creating the environment that's necessary for learning. That's beautiful.
Yes. Now we're going to start wrapping this up, Brian, because we already talked before this and we weren't talking about any of this stuff, and you and I talk a lot.
Yeah. Hey, Act 3. Come on.
You know what? I almost feel like we need to do like a little regular spot on here with you, because you have so much to share, and I love the way that you share the information with such grace, with such an open heart. And we're not being judgmental here. Look, honestly, I know, for example, I'm an advocate for CCM. But
Yeah.
I don't judge my classical colleagues. I just want to be able to stand beside those people with pride
Yes.
and with equality. And it's
Yeah.
the same as I'm not an acoustic expert, but I would like to be able to stand beside those people
Mhm.
and
Yep.
with pride and with equality. So I'm not being judgmental of anybody. I just want people to be open and receptive and not judgmental of other people who perhaps don't know what they know or approach things from a different perspective. Because
Right.
in as much as I pipe up and I have my commentary, I actually am very open. And I'm so grateful for the people that have been on my podcast over the 2.5 years, almost 2.5 years, because everyone that has come on here, no matter where they've come from, what their background is, what their speciality is, I have learnt something that shaped me into becoming the teacher that I am today.
Beautiful.
And
That's
I'm grateful to all of those people. And some things I will take on board, some things I don't because they don't work for me, but that works for them, and that's fine. So, segueing now, what do you think the future of vocal pedagogy looks like? If you had to look at a glass, what do you call that? A
yeah, the
crystal ball. That's
yeah, the
it.
crystal ball. I was like a globe. It's not a
I'm going,
globe.
I'm going.
The crystal ball. I mean, I would say, and it's kind of based off what you just said there, we need to continue to strive to create a more inclusive community. So I think I think we're headed there. I think we are, but I still think there are too many camps. And I think that there needs to be, again, like you said, openness to other ideas, and also I loved what you said, where you listen and we gain knowledge from everybody that we speak with, but some things might not resonate as much with us, and that's okay.
That's okay.
If they're using it for positive change, then that's great. That's their thing, and they know how to work. And we might think, that doesn't really, that wouldn't be. I feel like it would be disingenuous if I tried to employ that because I really don't understand it on a deep level. So I think that we need to embrace individuality. I think within teachers and obviously within our students that we've been talking about, but we also need to create a very inviting community and avoid the kind of camps that arise
The
with
camps with the flags and the campfire.
yes, yeah, yes, exactly. I mean, what happens is you end up dividing the group, and now I
Mm.
mean, just I guess a last kind of history thing, that I was always fascinated by people who were involved in legitimizing, let's say, which it was always legitimate. But anyway, legitimizing contemporary singing, right, and music and CCM, right? People who were involved in that necessarily had to build their own thing and claim it and say, okay, you don't respect what we do, we've got to do this. They had to. I think that historically
Yes,
that had to happen because there was just no respect from the classical side. And that
yes,
still exists to some degree, but less
yes,
so now. Right, and so what I think we really need in the future, we've got to crack that code, and we need to be looking at one of the talks I give all around the world is voice as an instrument. We need to be looking at voice as an instrument, and you can include any genre you want, and you can think about tissue cost and flow and acoustics and all those things, and the psychology of voice, all those things, and look at how they live in all of these different genres. And you can start to see that we are united by voice as an instrument. Period.
yes,
That's our instrument. We use it to play different ways. Like piano, you can do, do classical and you can do blues, right? You can do different things and it's still the same instrument. And I think voice is the same way. We just need to figure what makes it that, and then join as a community. And I think that would be the strongest way forward. It's still too
Excellent.
divided for me. So
Yeah, it is still divided. And when it comes to CCM, I think for those of us in the CCM camp, we've had to kind of set up camp
yeah,
to
yes,
to gain the respect and acknowledgement of our classical peers, especially those from higher education.
yeah, yes,
Yeah,
100%.
because what those people don't realize is when you're in a career in CCM, nobody cares and
Yeah,
nobody knows that there's this bias. They're just doing their job. They're making a lot of money and they don't care.
yeah,
So the people that are in the trenches working in that field,
yeah, yep,
no one cares. You're the
exactly.
only people that care.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that has to come to an end, it really
Yes,
does. I think that's so important. And so
yes,
conceptualizing it, I think, as an instrument is the most, we really, if from a philosophical perspective, that's
yes.
what we need to do. Voice is an instrument that can do a whole lot of things. We communicate a bunch of different ways, and you can, for each individual, tease out what is effective, ineffective for them, sustainable, not sustainable, right? And all these nuanced, less nuanced, right? We can tease out all those for each
Mhm.
individual, and all of those we're going to come up with some different answers for each person, but there are some big ballpark overlapping themes that we'll find in any genre and with voice as an instrument.
Yes, I love all that. So, what are you up to next?
Next, what do I do next? Well, my next trip is in a couple of weeks to Taiwan. So I
Oh,
go do a workshop for the Taipei Performing Arts Center, and then also for a theater company, VM Theater. And so that'll be fun. A lot of contemporary singing, and then I start school. I think I come back from that just after school started.
okay.
I'm announcing that now to my superiors. Yeah,
Okay, I'm sure they won't fire you. You're too valuable.
it's like let's hope not. Usually they like that I go around the world and promote Jacob School.
Of
So
course.
yeah, I mean it's an important thing, and so yeah, so that's my next thing, and then I'll continue on with other master classes and some other courses too. I'm talking to Johan and Filipa about doing another course.
Oh, Felipa, I love her too.
Me too. She's
Yes,
awesome.
I want to come and do your course. You actually have inspired me. I'd love to go to Sweden next year and do that.
Fantastic. That'd be great. You will love it. You will love it. It's such a unique environment. Anyway, we
Mm.
all eat together, all the meals. It's just, yeah, that would be wonderful.
So cool. So cool. But Brian, I can't thank you enough. You've spent so much time with me on this podcast and given such amazing, brilliant pearls of wisdom to our listeners. I'm forever grateful. And I do hope that we can connect again sometime in the future and find some other topic to tease out as well.
I would love it. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
I am super grateful to you for having me on. And again, I absolutely love chatting with you. So this has been great.
Like,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you, thank you, thank you, and
Yeah.
also for sharing your brilliance. I really appreciate that, and yeah, I think we have a lot of overlap. It's
We
wonderful.
do. We really do. And we're going to share your links with the listeners too. So if people want to find you and they want to have you come and speak wherever they're at or to your website or they want to have lessons with you, we'll share all that information in the show notes. But
Thank you.
thank you so much, Brian. It's late at night for you. So go and enjoy whatever is left of this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.